Good morning, Estimate guests. We are happy to meet you again today. Thank you very much, all of participants, and thank you very much for joining us today again. Excellencies and distinguished guests, we are proud to welcome you to the second day of 39th American-Turkish Conference organized by TAIEX, Turkey's first business council and reference point of Turkish-American economic relations, and in cooperation with the American-Turkish Business Roundtable, ATBR, and U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And now, I would like to kindly invite Honorable Ambassador Jeffrey Flake, the United States Ambassador to the Republic of Turkey, to deliver keynote speech.
Günaydın. It's so nice to be here. Let me just tell you, it's nice to be back in Washington, especially knowing that I don't have to rush to the Hill for a vote at any time. But the best part is knowing that I can speak to a bunch of well-dressed men and women in a hotel ballroom and not have to ask you for money at the end of my speech. I miss a lot about Washington and about Congress, but fundraising is not one of the things that I miss. But congratulations to Tayyip, Murat Bey, the U.S. Chamber, everyone who put this together on such short notice. It was a leap of faith to be able to do this just in a few short days, and I think it's been spectacular. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. And I'm grateful to share the podium today with my good friend and counterpart, Sedat Önal. Although when I go to his residence, as I did last night, it's tough to come away without a good case of residence envy. You know, I think he could sell one piece of artwork and buy our place in Turkey. But it was wonderful to be there. I got to know Sedat Bey when he was Deputy Foreign Minister. Appreciated that time together. I know he will be an incredible ambassador to Washington. So glad to have you here. There are many wonderful organizations and think tanks at this event. If you've read my bio, you know that just before my descent into politics, I ran a think tank in Arizona called the Goldwater Institute. I miss those days. But after 7 years of that, I figured I would try my hand at something different. And as some of you know, I grew up with 10 brothers and sisters, 69 first cousins on my father's side alone, in a town named after my ancestors. So I thought to myself, if I can get just about half of my relatives to vote for me, I'll be in Congress. And it worked. And with a large base of sympathetic family voters, I prevailed in 7 elections over 18 years. Before retiring from politics, or so I thought, to become a diplomat. But I soon learned that there's a lot of politics in a position like this as well. But as a former politician and a current diplomat, I've reflected on the essential intersection between politics and diplomacy. There is a malignant strain of politics that looks inward, that says we can become more secure and more prosperous by ignoring the outside world. In such a go-it-alone environment, there's little use for diplomacy. That philosophy is short-sighted. It will also be short-lived. Allow me to digress for a moment. 15 years ago, in August, I woke up in the middle of the night alone, very, very alone. I wasn't in Washington, D.C. or Arizona. I was in a hammock stretched between 2 coconut trees on a tiny, uninhabited island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That first night, the clouds blocked any light from the moon and the stars, and it was very, very dark. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone, very, very alone. I'd been dropped off on this small, deserted island by a fishing boat. I wasn't on assignment from the U.S. government. This wasn't some kind of punishment for voting against the Speaker of the House. I had willingly chosen and planned this adventure on my own. I had always been fascinated by survival stories. I especially loved the sailing adventures gone bad, the part where the sailing vessel never made it back to port. And I often wondered, if I were the lone survivor of a shipwreck on a deserted island, how could I survive? Could I survive? I wondered if I could find enough to eat on this island that I was on. Could I survive for just 7 days just eating coconut? There were a lot of fish in the ocean, but could I spear them and get to shore before a shark took a bite out of them or me? I brought a magnifying glass to start a fire, but what if the sun wasn't shining? I grew up on a cattle ranch. I didn't even like fish. How could I eat raw fish? As it turned out, I was able to start a fire. I was able to spear enough fish to survive for those 7 days before the boat picked me up. I probably took more risk than a responsible husband and father of 5 kids should take, but I lived to tell about it. But the most difficult thing for me during that week was the extreme loneliness I felt. It started on the first night, and it never left me. I was so lonely by the middle of the week, I numbered the hermit crabs that wandered through my camp. I picked the first one up. I wondered if this is the same batch. Are they doing laps, or are these new ones? So I wrote number 1 on his shell and put him down. Next one, number 2. By the end of the week, I had 126 numbered friends. I still miss number 72, by the way. But there's an old poem that says, "No man is an island." I can attest to that fact. And while there might be island countries, no country can be an island unto itself. Every country needs friends and allies. Our security, our prosperity, our contentment as individuals living in sovereign states very much depends on those friendships and those alliances. When I said during my Senate confirmation hearing nearly 3 years ago that the U.S. and Turkey were indispensable allies, I was challenged by one of my former colleagues. You may know who. Is Turkey really an indispensable ally of the United States, he asked. I believe the answer is an unqualified yes. I sometimes tell my former colleagues that I swam from Asia to Europe, and it took me just about an hour and 15 minutes. This is not to brag about my rather anemic aquatic abilities. It's just an acknowledgement that one country, and even one city, Istanbul, straddles that continental divide. While war rages in Ukraine to the north, and war ravages Gaza to the south, here sits Turkey, smack dab in the middle. Turkey will always have an important role to play. Geopolitics and geography dictates that, as does Turkey's growing military, economic, and industrial prowess. But I want to be clear, the U.S.-Turkish alliance has always been rooted in far more than just geopolitics. We share values, we share common interest, mutual interest. I take the fundamental view that we are natural partners. We have proven that in the decades since World War II many times over, when our shared principles have been challenged. So where are we today? Let's talk a little about what's happened just in the past couple of months. In March of this year, I was here in Washington for the 7th U.S.-Turkey Strategic Mechanism meeting. In those discussions, we made a number of significant commitments and welcomed the opportunity to use this mechanism to build a positive, forward-looking strategic vision. Secretary Blinken and Minister Fidan reaffirmed our longstanding commitment to collective defense as allies and announced a U.S.-Turkey defense trade dialogue. The counterterrorism consultations were relaunched to expand cooperation against terrorism. We also reaffirmed the importance of expanding economic and commercial cooperation with events like the Digital Dialogue, which was held in March in Turkey. In the energy sector, we committed to an energy and climate dialogue to advance energy security and the fight against climate change. I'm delighted that took place in Washington just 2 days ago. We've also had several senior U.S. officials travel to Ankara just recently to deepen coordination on regional security and to hold high-level meetings on counterterrorism as well as our growing defense trade. And if that weren't enough, just a week ago, for the first time since 2017, we held a round of TIFA talks in Ankara. 2 weeks from now, some of us here in this room will be in Mesquite, Texas, where the U.S. Department of Defense is building 3 155mm munition lines purchased from the Turkish defense firm Repkon. By this time next year, 30% of all 155 rounds made in the United States will be a result of this U.S.-Turkey partnership. So, is Turkey an indispensable ally of the United States? You bet it is. Who else could have invoked the Montreux Convention to keep Russian warships out of the Black Sea? Who, other than Turkey, could have negotiated a grain deal at a critical time in the war, resulting in 33 million tons of grain safely making it to more than 40 countries, mostly in the global south? Who, other than Turkey, has proven itself a viable alternative to China and Russia in sub-Saharan Africa and Central Asia for countries looking for high-quality infrastructure without the accompanying debt trap? And let me just say that while the bilateral security and trade relationship has been enormously successful, the people-to-people ties are one of the most important pillars of the relationship between our two countries. Of course, my favorite example of people-to-people ties comes from my own family. More than 30 years ago, before we were married, my wife Cheryl was part of a singing, dancing, performing group from Brigham Young University, ironically called the Young Ambassadors. I know, I'm the old ambassador. The joke writes itself. But Cheryl made her way to Egypt and Jordan and Greece and Turkey. And when she was home, she wrote in her photo album, under beautiful pictures of Istanbul and other parts of Turkey, these words: "Turkey, my favorite place." We would not call Ankara home today had it not been for this people-to-people exchange that happened more than 30 years ago. By the way, Cheryl wishes she could be here today. She's welcoming a new grandchild in Texas. She would have really liked to participate in the next panel on tourism. There is no more enthusiastic proponent of American tourism to Turkey than Cheryl. In just 1 month last year, we hosted 43 friends and relatives from the United States at our residence in Ankara, not all at the same time, gratefully. So when you see U.S. tourism numbers jump exponentially this year, just realize that more than half of them are my relatives. They keep coming, but they're too cheap to spend much money, so I'm sorry for that. But in closing, at this ATC, we don't question whether our two countries are indispensable values. We celebrate the fact that they are. We are more secure, we are more prosperous by working together and relying on each other. That's why I'm so fortunate to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. And right now, I would like to kindly invite His Excellency, Ambassador Sedat Önal, the Republic of Turkey Ambassador to the United States, to deliver his keynote speech.
Good morning. Mr. Murat Özyeğin, Chairman of the Turkish-American Council, Mr. Nail Opak, President of the Foreign Economic Relations Board, Ambassador Flake, Mr. Kushchowski from U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It is a distinct pleasure for me to address you today on the occasion of 39th edition of American-Turkish Council Conference. I would like to thank the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Turkish American Business Council for their flawless organization. And in the beginning, I would also like to recognize the contributions of my dear friend, Ambassador Flake, to Turkish-American relations. From the very beginning, as he said, I was Deputy Minister when he arrived in Turkey. His contributions has been very constructive, very helpful. So I would like to express our appreciations for his efforts. Thank you, Jeff. This is the first ATC conference held in person since 2019. This is also my very first ATC in my capacity as Ambassador of Turkey to the United States. I am looking forward to cooperating and coordinating with each and every one of you as we try to advance Turkish-American relations in such a way to serve the interests of both countries, as well as peace, security, and prosperity in the world. For nearly 4 decades, American-Turkish Council has brought together business leaders and government officials from both sides. Discussions and exchanges at the ATC have led to many fruitful partnerships, creating synergy and fostering time-honored bonds between Turkey and the United States. On this occasion, I would like to share our perspective on where we are and what we aim to achieve in our bilateral relations with the United States. As I said yesterday, our relations, like between any given 2 countries, are informed and influenced by history, geography, universal values we both believe in, and last but not least, national interests. As for history, as Jeff put it, as 2 staunch NATO allies, our solidarity stood the test of time, especially through the Cold War years. Yet, regional fallout from first 9/11 attacks and then so-called Arab Spring created challenges and sometimes divergences in our relationship. Turkey is now surrounded by multiple flashpoints of conflict and instability, from Syria to Iraq and Libya, from the Caucasus to Ukraine and Gaza. Sustainable resolution of these crises necessitates alignment among the main stakeholders and principled positions, prioritizing dialogue and diplomacy rather than relying solely on the dynamics on the ground to determine the trajectory of the conflicts. Greater convergence and complementarity between our 2 nations would certainly bring added value in this regard. Actually, it was in this understanding that strategic mechanism was launched between our 2 countries in 2021 in compliance with the commitment of our presidents. The 7th meeting of such mechanism was held in March under the co-chairmanship of Foreign Minister Fidan and Secretary Blinken. The objective of this mechanism is to advance shared interests on a wide range of issues, including fighting terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, defense cooperation, trade, energy, and climate change, but also to discuss ways and means of addressing new and emerging global challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, against all odds like COVID pandemic, Turkey-US trade and investment relations have proved to be resilient. Our trade relations not only weathered the storms, but also expanded remarkably. Bilateral trade volume rose from $19 billion in 2019 to $32 billion last year. In the post-pandemic world, efforts to ensure supply chain diversification and resilience have contributed in reinforcing bilateral trade volume. This is enabled, among other things, by Turkey's strong industrial base and skilled workforce, underpinned by robust regional and global connectivity infrastructure. Turkey's import of LNG from the US has also been an important catalyst in this regard. On the margins of this conference, Potash and Exxon signed an agreement for the supply of LNG for the next decade. This is yet another important step towards reaching the target of $100 billion trade volume. Both the US and Turkish economies are well equipped in terms of their comparative advantages and complementarities to progressively get closer to this target. By leveraging opportunities in green technologies and renewables, such as wind, solar, geothermal, hydrogen, electricity production, as well as novel technologies, we could really realize our potential. Increased cooperation between our two countries could also help expand security, stability, and prosperity in various regions, while also contributing to the fulfillment of Sustainable Development Goals. In this regard, joint ventures and infrastructure projects could be realized in Asian and African continents. Actually, relevant authorities on both sides have already started to explore new avenues through enhanced economic dialogue. In this connection, the following initiatives are worth mentioning. US Chamber's Green Technology Mission to Turkey last February. Trade and Investment Framework Agreement Joint Council meeting in late April. The upcoming Trade Winds Forum that will return to Istanbul next week after 15 years. Last but not least, launch of the Energy and Climate Dialogue a few days ago by our Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources and US Department of Energy. Distinguished guests, in spite of progressive development of our economic relations and steps towards structured political dialogue within the context of strategic mechanism, there is still room for improvement in various contentious issues in our relations. In order to address our differences in an effective and result-oriented manner, we need to adopt a strategic rather than transactional approach. Agreeing to disagree and meeting at the lowest common denominator could not and should not be sufficient for strategic allies. Therefore, we need to come up with ways and means of insulating our bilateral relations against conjectural disruptions and the indirect repercussions of developments that are foreign to the time-tested solidarity and friendship between our two countries. When faced with seemingly difficult hurdles and sometimes false choices, we should always keep in mind the fact that our relations are not one-dimensional, but multidimensional. That is, our relations are not just about the present, but they have a past and they have a future. And the course of action we take should be in keeping with this multidimensional nature of our relations. Therefore, it takes a genuine effort to pay attention to each other's sensitivities and existential security concerns. An open-hearted and sustainable dialogue that includes increased interaction not only at the government level, but also at the parliament, civil society, and private sector level. Enhancement and facilitation of people-to-people contacts should be part and parcel of this exercise. From trade and investment to defense and security, our countries can enjoy the benefits of this multidimensional cooperation. Efforts in all these spheres should be exerted in a mutually reinforcing manner, rather than canceling each other out in a mutually exclusive approach. While concluding, I would like to express our readiness to work with all of you in realizing this vision for the benefit of our two countries. I thank you.